Until the Rosetta Stone was discovered and promptly acquired by Napoleon's campaign in Egypt, no one in the modern age had a clue about how Egyptian writing worked. The most popular idea was that they were purely ideographic, with each drawing representing a concept.
They decoded a 2,200-year-old stone. What they found inside it is being hidden from the public. For centuries, historians told us they understood the Rosetta Stone. They were wrong. When AI was finally turned on, something terrifying surfaced beneath the words.
A 2,000-year-old scroll from the Roman town of Herculaneum has been digitally unwrapped. The document was badly burnt by the volcanic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD.
A message that was never meant for them. It was meant for us. Scientists are refusing to talk about it. Institutions are controlling what gets released, and the few experts who have spoken up are using one word to describe what was found. A warning. What did the ancients know that we don't? In the summer of 1799, a group of French soldiers was carrying out routine construction work near the town of Rosetta, a small port city in northern Egypt known today as Rashid. They were digging foundations as part of Napoleon Bonaparte's military campaign in the region when one of them struck something solid in the ground. What they pulled from the earth was a large, dark slab of granodiorite stone, roughly the size of a small tabletop, covered on one side with rows of densely packed writing. At the time, nobody could have known just how significant that moment would turn out to be. The stone they had uncovered would go on to become one of the most important archaeological discoveries in recorded history. What made the slab so remarkable was not just the fact that it was old or that it was covered in symbols. It was that the same message appeared to be written on it 3 times, each time in a different script. The top section was carved in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, the formal writing system used for religious and official texts. The middle section was written in Demotic, a simpler, more everyday script that Egyptians used for administrative and personal purposes. The bottom section was in ancient Greek, the language used by the ruling class of Egypt at the time, as the country was then governed by the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek-speaking royal family that had ruled Egypt since the death of Alexander the Great. It was this trilingual combination that gave the stone its extraordinary value. For centuries leading up to that discovery, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics had been completely unreadable to modern scholars. The symbols were recognized as a writing system, but no living person could interpret them. They had been out of active use for so long that all knowledge of how to read them had simply died out. Scholars could look at the walls of temples and tombs covered in detailed carvings and illustrations, but the meaning behind all of it was entirely lost. Some had assumed the symbols were purely decorative, or that they functioned more like pictures than letters. Without the ability to read them, an enormous portion of ancient Egyptian history, culture, religion, and daily life remained completely out of reach. The Rosetta Stone changed that. Because scholars could already read ancient Greek fluently, they were able to use the Greek text as a reference point for decoding the other 2 scripts. It was a slow and painstaking process, but eventually a French scholar named Jean-François Champollion made the critical breakthrough. In 1822, after years of careful study, Champollion announced that he had cracked the code. He had managed to work out that hieroglyphics were not simply a set of pictures representing objects, but a complex writing system that combined phonetic sounds with symbolic meaning. His findings opened the door to reading thousands of inscriptions that had been silent for more than 1,000 years. Tomb walls, papyrus scrolls, temple columns. All of it suddenly became legible. As for the content of the Rosetta Stone itself, it turned out to be a relatively straightforward official document. It is a decree issued in 196 BCE by a council of Egyptian priests in honor of the pharaoh Ptolemy V. The text praises the young ruler, outlines a number of religious and financial benefits granted to temples and priests throughout Egypt, and orders that copies of the decree be displayed in every major temple in the country. It is, in essence, a piece of political administration, not unlike an official government announcement today. There is nothing in the surface reading of the text that suggests anything unusual or mysterious. And yet the stone became far more than its words. The act of writing the same message in 3 different scripts was itself a statement. It was meant to communicate authority and permanence. The priests and scribes who created it wanted to make sure the message could be understood by as many people as possible, from educated Greek-speaking officials to native Egyptian clergy, and that it would endure. carving it into stone rather than writing it on papyrus was a deliberate choice. Stone was meant to last forever. In ancient Egyptian culture, the written word carried a kind of sacred weight. Language was not just a tool for communication, it was believed to hold real power. To write something down, especially in stone, was to give it permanence in a way that went beyond the physical world. The stone eventually made its way to Britain after French forces in Egypt were defeated by the British in 1801. Under the terms of the capitulation of Alexandria, a number of antiquities collected by the French were handed over to the British, and the Rosetta Stone was among them. It was shipped to London and has been on display at the British Museum ever since, where it remains one of the most visited objects in the entire collection. For roughly 2 centuries, the stone sat in museums and archives while generations of Egyptologists studied it, translated it, and debated its finer points. It was considered a solved problem, a brilliant tool that had already done its job. But in recent years, a new kind of analysis has been applied to it, one that was simply not possible until very recently. That analysis involves artificial intelligence, and what it has started to reveal is prompting a fresh wave of interest among researchers. Over the past decade or so, artificial intelligence has become an increasingly useful tool in the study of ancient languages and texts. The challenge with historical linguistics has always been one of scale and complexity. There are millions of ancient documents, tablets, scrolls, and inscriptions stored in museums, universities, and private collections around the world, and the number of trained experts capable of reading them is relatively small. Many texts have never been fully translated simply because there are not enough specialists and not enough time. Machine learning systems are beginning to change that. Researchers working with cuneiform tablets, the wedge-shaped script used across ancient Mesopotamia, have used AI models to produce translations in a fraction of the time it would take a human scholar. A project focused on the Dead Sea Scrolls, a collection of ancient Jewish manuscripts discovered in the Judean desert in the 1940s and 1950s, used AI to musvals, analyzed subtle differences in handwriting and concluded that at least 2 different scribes were responsible for one of the most studied scrolls, a finding that had not been confirmed through traditional analysis alone. Similar work has been done with Mayan hieroglyphics, where AI has identified recurring patterns that are helping researchers piece together a script that remains only partially understood. The reason AI is particularly well suited to this kind of work is that it does not approach a text the way a human reader does. A person reads for meaning, skimming over details that seem irrelevant and filling in gaps with assumptions. An AI system, by contrast, processes every element of a text with the same level of attention. It notices repetition, spacing, frequency of specific symbols, and structural anomalies that a human might overlook simply because they were not looking for them. When applied to damaged or incomplete texts, some AI models can even suggest what's missing. Sections might have said, based on the linguistic patterns found in the parts that survive. When researchers turned this kind of technology on the Rosetta Stone, the initial expectation was that it would simply confirm what was already known. The text had been translated. The stone had been studied for over 2 centuries. There did not seem to be much left to find. But the AI analysis began flagging things that had not been noted before. Certain hieroglyphs appeared to have been carved with subtle differences from the rest. Some groupings of symbols seemed to align in ways that went beyond the straightforward reading of the decree. The system identified what it described as structural irregularities that were statistically unlikely to be the result of simple human error or natural variation in the carving process. Whether those irregularities amount to anything significant is still a matter of active debate among scholars. But the fact that a 200-year-old artifact is generating new questions in the age of artificial intelligence says something in itself. The Rosetta Stone was once celebrated as the answer to a great mystery. It may turn out that it was also the beginning of one. When the AI systems began processing high-resolution scans of the Rosetta Stone, the researchers involved were not expecting surprises. The stone had been one of the most closely studied objects in the history of archaeology. It had passed through the hands of some of the most accomplished linguists and Egyptologists the academic world had ever produced. The assumption was reasonable. If there were anything significant left to find, someone would have found it by now. That assumption turned out to be worth reconsidering. The algorithms did not simply read the text the way a human scholar would. Instead, they broke the stone down into its individual components, analyzing the frequency of specific symbols, the spacing between characters, the depth and angle of certain carvings, and the structural relationship between different sections of the text. What emerged from that process was not a clean confirmation of the existing translation. It was a set of anomalies, small in isolation, but collectively difficult to dismiss. Some of the hieroglyphs, when examined at this level of detail, appeared to have been carved with subtle but measurable differences from the surrounding text. A handful of symbol groupings seemed to carry a structural weight that did not fit neatly into the straightforward reading of a royal decree. The AI flagged these not as errors or signs of wear, but as statistically significant irregularities, patterns that were unlikely to have appeared by accident. In academic language, the system identified what it called layered text, meaning that while the official reading of the stone moves smoothly from beginning to end as a political document, certain hieroglyphs appeared to carry additional meaning when grouped and interpreted in a different way. This concept is not as unusual as it might first sound. Ancient Egyptian scribes were highly trained professionals who operated within a rich tradition of symbolic and layered writing. Hieroglyphic script was not just a practical communication tool, it was considered sacred. The word hieroglyphics itself comes from the Greek words for sacred and carved. Scribes spent years learning not only how to write, but how to embed multiple levels of meaning into a single inscription. Texts found in temples and tombs regularly contain what scholars refer to as dual readings, an outer meaning accessible to general audiences, and an inner meaning intended for priests, initiates, or those with a deeper understanding of the symbolic system. The existence of layered meaning in an important official text would not, in that context, have been considered unusual at all. It would have been expected. What was unexpected was the nature of the secondary reading that the AI appeared to be identifying. Rather than finding additional praise for the king or further administrative detail, the system produced translations that carried a markedly different character. The language it identified in these secondary groupings was not political. It was cautionary. References emerged to cycles of disorder, to floods and fire, to rivers becoming hostile to human life, and to the consequences of human behavior pushing against natural and divine limits. These were not vague or poetic phrases scattered loosely across the text. According to the analysis, they were structured, deliberate, and consistent in their tone. The reaction among researchers was divided, as it tends to be when findings challenge established understanding. Some Egyptologists pointed out that even a partially accurate reading of this kind would suggest that the scribes who created the Rosetta Stone were far more sophisticated in their methods than previously appreciated. Others were more skeptical, arguing that AI systems, however powerful, are prone to a problem known as overfitting, where the algorithm finds patterns in data that reflect the structure of its own training rather than anything genuinely present in the material being studied. In other words, the concern was that the machine might be seeing what it had been, in a sense, taught to look for rather than what was actually there. That is a legitimate scientific concern, and it is one that researchers in this field take seriously. But it does not fully account for the fact that the themes the AI identified in the Rosetta Stone are not arbitrary. They are themes that appear with striking consistency across the ancient world, and that consistency predates artificial intelligence by several thousand years. Long before the Rosetta Stone was carved in 196 BCE, ancient Egyptian religious texts were already describing scenarios of large-scale destruction. One of the most well-known is a story referred to by scholars as the destruction of mankind, preserved in Esntumsed, text found in royal tombs dating back to the New Kingdom period, roughly 1550 to 1070 BCE. In that narrative, the sun god Ra sends a powerful and violent force to punish humanity for turning away from divine order. The destruction described is wholesale and graphic, stopped only at the last moment through an act of intervention. The story was not presented as fiction, it was presented as sacred history, a record of something that had actually occurred and a warning about what could occur again if humanity repeated the same mistakes. This kind of narrative is not unique to Egypt. Across the ancient world, civilizations that had no known contact with one another produced remarkably similar stories. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving works of literature, originating in ancient Mesopotamia and dating back to at least 2100 BCE, contains a detailed account of a great flood sent by the gods to destroy humanity, survived only by a single man warned in advance to build a vessel. The story shares so many specific details with the later account of Noah in the Hebrew Bible that scholars have debated for generations whether one tradition influenced the other or whether both were drawing from an even older common source. Greek mythology contains its own flood narrative in which a figure named Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha survive a catastrophic deluge sent by Zeus. Hindu sacred texts describe a cyclical model of time in which the world passes through successive ages, each one ending in large-scale destruction before a new cycle begins. The ancient Maya developed a detailed calendar system that incorporated the concept of world ages, each ending in a different form of catastrophe. Across the Pacific, indigenous oral traditions in numerous cultures describe great floods or fires that reshaped the world in the distant past. The repetition of these themes across cultures separated by vast distances and thousands of years has prompted serious academic discussion. One school of thought holds that these stories reflect genuine collective memory, that they are garbled but real accounts of natural catastrophes experienced by early human populations and passed down through generations of oral tradition before eventually being committed to writing. There is scientific evidence to support the idea that major environmental events occurred in the period when many of these stories were first being told. Significant flooding events associated with the end of the last ice age around 10,000 years ago would have been experienced by human populations across multiple continents. A catastrophe on that scale, lived through and passed down in story form over hundreds of generations, could plausibly have given rise to flood myths in regions that never had any direct contact with one another. Another perspective is less focused on literal events and more on the symbolic function of these narratives. Myths about destruction, whether by flood, fire, or divine punishment, serve a clear social purpose. They communicate the consequences of disorder, of turning away from the values that hold a community together. They warn against arrogance, against overexploitation of natural resources, and against the kind of collective behavior that leads to societal collapse. In this reading, the ancients were not recording history so much as encoding practical wisdom in a form that was memorable, emotionally resonant, and therefore more likely to be preserved and repeated. Both interpretations are plausible, and they are not mutually exclusive. What makes the AI's findings about the Rosetta Stone interesting in this context is that they suggest the scribes who produced it may have been doing something similar, embedding a second layer of meaning into an official document, one that spoke not to the political moment, but to a longer view of human history and human behavior. Whether that secondary layer was intentional, or whether it is an artifact of the AI's analytical process is still being debated. What is harder to set aside is the timing, the themes the AI identified: disruption of natural systems, the spread of disease, the failure of food and water supplies, read less like ancient mythology and more like a summary of challenges that are very much part of the present moment. Global temperatures are rising, weather patterns are becoming less predictable. In recent years, the world experienced a pandemic that disrupted daily life on a scale not seen in a century. Food security is a growing concern in multiple regions. These are not abstract or distant problems, they are current ones. That does not mean the Rosetta Stone predicted them. It means that the kinds of pressures ancient civilizations warned about are not so different from the ones modern societies are now confronting. Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, all of them faced periods of environmental stress, political instability, and social breakdown. All of them produced texts warning future generations to pay attention. The question that the AI's analysis quietly raises is not whether the ancients had supernatural foresight. It is whether we have been paying enough attention to what they left behind. The Rosetta Stone has never been a neutral object. From the moment it was pulled out of the ground near Rosetta in 1799, it became something that powerful institutions wanted to own, control, and define. The French soldiers who found it were operating under Napoleon Bonaparte's broader ambition to claim Egypt and its history as a kind of cultural trophy. When British forces defeated the French in Egypt 2 years later, the stone was among the antiquities transferred to British hands under the terms of the Capitulation of Alexandria. It was shipped to London, handed over to the British Museum, and has remained there ever since, despite repeated requests from Egypt for its return. That history of ownership and dispute is not just a footnote, it tells you something important about how ancient knowledge has always been treated. as a resource to be controlled rather than shared. That dynamic did not disappear with the end of the colonial era. It simply changed shape. Today, the institutions that hold the most significant ancient artifacts are museums, universities, and research organizations, mostly based in Europe and North America. The decisions about what gets studied, how findings are interpreted, and what gets published are made within those institutions by relatively small groups of specialists. For the most part, that system works well enough, but it also means that when something genuinely unexpected emerges from a study, the path from discovery to public knowledge is not always straightforward. The AI analysis of the Rosetta Stone has already demonstrated this. Not all of the findings have been shared openly. Some researchers involved in the work have spoken cautiously about the results, expressing concern about how they might be received. There is a real tension in academic circles between the desire to share knowledge and the fear of being associated with findings that could be dismissed as sensationalist. Egyptology is a serious discipline with a long history, and scholars within it are understandably protective of its reputation. Publishing a paper that suggests a famous ancient artifact contains hidden prophetic warnings is not a career move most academics would take lightly, regardless of what the data actually shows. This caution is understandable, but it has consequences. When findings are held back or communicated only in vague terms, it creates a vacuum that tends to get filled with speculation. The less that institutions say, the more that people outside those institutions will imagine. There is also a broader question about who has the right to decide what the public gets to know about objects that belong, in a real sense, to all of humanity. The Rosetta Stone is not the private property of the British Museum. It is a piece of the shared human past. If new analysis of it produces significant findings, the argument for transparency is a strong one. This tension between knowledge and control is not a modern invention. Ancient Egypt operated on a very similar principle. Hieroglyphics were not a writing system that was open to everyone. Learning to read and write them required years of formal training, and that training was available only to a small class of scribes and priests. Literacy in ancient Egypt has been estimated by some historians at somewhere between 1% and 5% of the population. The written word was, by design, the preserve of a small elite. That elite used its control over writing to maintain its social position, to manage religious practice, and to communicate with both the ruling class and, as they understood it, the divine world. The same basic structure has repeated itself throughout history in different forms. In medieval Europe, Latin was the language of the church and of educated elites, while the majority of the population had no access to it. The texts that shaped religious and political life were available only to those who had been trained to read them. When the printing press arrived in the 15th century and books began to be produced in vernacular languages that ordinary people could actually read, the effect on the existing power structure was enormous. Access to knowledge, it turned out, was deeply connected to access to power. Artificial intelligence is, in some ways, the printing press of the current era. It has the potential to make knowledge far more accessible, to break down barriers that have traditionally kept certain kinds of analysis in the hands of specialists. A machine learning system can process a damaged ancient text and suggest reconstructions in a matter of hours. It can identify patterns across thousands of documents simultaneously. It can make connections that no individual human, researcher however brilliant, would have the time or cognitive bandwidth to make on their own. That is genuinely democratizing, and the work being done on ancient languages and texts is one of the more positive examples of what AI can do when pointed in a constructive direction. But the same technology also concentrates power in new ways. The AI systems capable of this kind of analysis are not widely distributed. They are developed and operated by a relatively small number of technology companies and research institutions. The decisions about what those systems are trained on, what questions they are asked, and how their outputs are interpreted are made by a similarly small group of people. The risk is not that AI will suddenly make ancient knowledge universally available. The risk is that it will transfer control of that knowledge from one small group, the traditional academic establishment, to another, the technology sector and the institutions that fund it. There is also the question of what happens when AI findings touch on subjects that are politically or religiously sensitive. The Rosetta Stone is a relatively contained example, but the principle applies much more broadly. Ancient texts and artifacts are deeply connected to questions of identity, faith, and national history. If AI analysis of a sacred text produced findings that challenged a widely held religious interpretation, the implications would extend far beyond academic debate. Governments and religious institutions would have strong reasons to influence how those findings were communicated, or whether they were communicated at all. The history of the past 2 centuries offers plenty of examples of archaeological and historical findings being suppressed, reframed, or simply ignored because they were inconvenient to the prevailing narrative of whoever was in charge. What all of this points toward is a need for serious thought about governance. The tools now available for analyzing ancient texts are extraordinarily powerful, and the findings they produce can be genuinely significant. The frameworks for deciding how those findings are handled have not kept pace with the technology. Questions about transparency, access, and the rights of source communities to participate in the interpretation of their own heritage are not new, but they are becoming more urgent as the capabilities of AI continue to expand. Setting aside the institutional and political dimensions for a moment, there is a more immediate question raised by everything the analysis of the Rosetta Stone has brought to the surface. It's not really a question about ancient Egypt or about artificial intelligence or even about archaeology. It is a question about what we do with warnings. The themes that appear in the Rosetta Stone and that echo across so many other ancient texts from so many different cultures are not difficult to interpret. They describe societies under stress. They describe the consequences of overreaching, of ignoring natural limits, of prioritizing short-term political gain over long-term stability. They describe what happens when the systems that sustain human life, agricultural, environmental, social, begin to break down. These are not abstract concepts. Every major civilization that produced this kind of literature eventually faced exactly the pressures it was warning about. Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, the Maya, none of them were immune. What is striking about the current moment is how many of those same pressures are visibly present. Climate change is altering weather patterns in ways that are already affecting food and water security in multiple regions. Biodiversity loss is reducing the resilience of ecosystems that human populations depend on. Political instability is rising in a number of countries, driven in part by economic pressures that are themselves connected to environmental change. These are not predictions, they are documented, measurable trends that are being tracked by scientists and reported on in detail. The ancient warnings did not require supernatural insight to produce. They required only the experience of having lived through collapse once before. The parallel that the Rosetta Stone and the broader tradition of ancient cautionary writing draws is not between the gods of ancient Egypt and the forces of nature. It is between the behavior of ancient human societies and the behavior of modern ones. The specific technologies are different. The scale is different. The underlying patterns, the tendency to assume that current prosperity is permanent, to discount long-term risks in favor of short-term gains, to concentrate knowledge and power in ways that serve elites at the expense of broader populations, are recognizably the same. That is perhaps the most useful thing the Rosetta Stone can offer in its current moment of renewed attention. Not prophecy, not mystery, not the thrill of hidden codes. Just the straightforward and somewhat uncomfortable observation that the problems facing human civilization today are not new, that people have faced versions of them before, that some of those people were thoughtful enough to write down what they observed and what they feared, and that those records are still here, waiting to be read carefully and taken seriously. The stone was carved to last. It has lasted. Whether the message it carries, in whatever layers it may contain, is one that the present moment is willing to hear is a different question entirely, and one that only the present moment can answer.